July 1944. A mountain resort in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. The war in Europe is still raging. The Pacific Front hasn't broken. Tens of millions of people are dead. And inside this hotel, the Mount Washington, isolated, quiet, tucked into the White Mountains, 730 delegates from 44 nations are sitting down to redesign the world's financial system. Nobody voted on what came out of that room. Nobody asked the people who would live inside it. And the agreement they reached, signed, codified, institutionalized, is still running the global economy today. An 80-year-old architecture, built for a world that no longer exists. And right now, it's beginning to crack. Systems like this one don't fail with an announcement. They fail in slow motion, through decisions made quietly, in rooms most people never hear about. By the time it's visible, the exit is already closing. This is the pattern, and it's moving right now. To understand what they built in that hotel, you have to understand what came before it. The 1930s had been a financial catastrophe. The Great Depression didn't just destroy economies, it destroyed trust. Between countries, between currencies, between ordinary people and the institutions they'd been told to rely on. Governments responded by devaluing their currencies in sequence, each one trying to gain a trade edge over the others. Every country protecting itself, nobody stabilizing the whole. The result was a spiral that made everything worse. And when economies collapse that way, when people lose savings, lose jobs, lose confidence in the system, history shows what tends to follow. They reach for whoever promises control. The instability of the 1930s didn't just produce poverty. It produced the political conditions for the war those delegates were now trying to end. So the question in that New Hampshire hotel was blunt. How do we make sure this never happens again? The answer required an anchor. One fixed point every currency could be measured against. Something stable, something the whole world trusted. The United States had something no one else could offer. American cities were intact. American factories were running harder than they ever had. While Europe and Asia had burned through their wealth fighting, America had accumulated it. By 1944, the United States held nearly 2/3 of the world's gold reserves. That wasn't a bargaining chip. It was the entire table. So the system was built around American dominance. The US dollar would be pegged to gold at a fixed rate, $35 per ounce. Every other participating currency would then be pegged to the dollar. That chain, currency to dollar, dollar to gold, was the Bretton Woods system. Other nations needed this as much as America wanted it. Their economies were shattered. Their currencies were unreliable. Tying themselves to the dollar meant tying themselves to stability, to a country with gold, productive capacity, and institutional credibility. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were created at the same conference. Both headquartered in Washington. Both designed to reinforce the system. On paper, it looked like international cooperation. In reality, it concentrated power. What they actually built was dependence. Global, structural, inescapable dependence on the American dollar and on America's willingness to honor the promises attached to it. And for a while, the dependence felt fine, because the system worked. The 1950s, the 1960s, economies growing, trade expanding. A post-war world rebuilding faster than anyone thought possible. People trusted it. They had no reason not to. But underneath that stability, something was already wrong. The promise at the center of the system, the dollar backed by gold, gold backing everything, required discipline. It required America to behave like a country with limits, to hold enough gold to honor every dollar it put into circulation. America decided it didn't have any. The Cold War needed funding. Korea needed funding. Vietnam needed funding. Military bases on every continent needed funding. An empire, because that's what it was, functionally, needed constant, sustained, enormous funding. So America spent, and spent, and spent. Dollars poured out of the United States and into the world, into foreign banks, into foreign economies, into the reserves of countries that had little choice but to hold them. But the gold backing those dollars wasn't multiplying with them. By the late 1960s, everyone could see the same thing. The numbers didn't work anymore. Other countries started to notice, quietly at first, then less quietly. France's President Charles de Gaulle said publicly what others were thinking privately, that the arrangement wasn't a partnership, it was extraction. America was printing paper. The rest of the world was trading real labor, real resources, real commodities for it. France began converting its dollar reserves back into gold, demanding physical delivery from US vaults. Others followed. And behind closed doors, the math was becoming impossible to ignore. There were far more dollars in circulation than there was gold to honor them. The promise was already broken. It just hadn't been admitted yet. Then came August 15th, 1971. No warning, no negotiation, no international agreement. President Nixon appeared on television on a Sunday night and announced that the United States would no longer convert dollars to gold. Unilaterally, in a speech most Americans barely understood, and most of the world wasn't consulted on. He called it temporary. He said it would protect ordinary people from speculators and instability. Each of those things was a version of the truth, carefully arranged to obscure what had actually happened. What had actually happened was this: the original promise, the one the entire world had organized itself around for 27 years, had been abandoned. And the world had no say in it. Here's where most people think the story ends. It doesn't, because what came next wasn't collapse. It was something more consequential than collapse. Without gold to anchor it, the dollar needed a new foundation, a new reason for the world to keep using it, holding it, depending on it. They found one: oil. In 1974, the Nixon administration struck a deal with Saudi Arabia. Oil, the commodity every industrial economy on Earth required, would be priced and traded in dollars. In exchange, the US would provide military protection and security guarantees to the Saudi regime. The other major OPEC producers fell in line shortly after. Overnight, the system that appeared to have collapsed quietly reassembled itself into something more durable than before. Every country that needed oil, which was every country, now had a structural reason to hold dollars, which meant holding American debt, buying into American financial markets, absorbing American inflation, whether they wanted to or not. The system sold as stability for all had become leverage for one, and the leverage was invisible. No borders, no army required. Just a currency, everywhere, always. Quietly running the global economy while everyone called it the free market. Now, look around. Not at the headlines, not at the politics. Look at the behavior, because behavior is where the truth lives, long before anyone says it out loud. Countries that spent decades settling everything in dollars are quietly building alternatives. China and Russia have expanded bilateral trade in their own currencies. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the BRICS nations, are actively developing mechanisms to reduce dollar dependency in cross-border transactions. Some of the world's largest oil producers are exploring, and in some cases accepting, payment in currencies other than the dollar for the first time in 50 years. Central banks are buying gold at a pace not seen in generations. Not because gold is fashionable, because the institutions managing entire national economies are hedging. And institutions don't hedge against nothing. This is what the pattern looks like before the announcement, before the speech, before the night someone appears on television and explains calmly that the rules have changed. It always starts here, quiet, gradual, almost invisible. Countries making small decisions, bilateral agreements, alternative systems built on the edges, not replacements yet, just options, just in case. The original Bretton Woods system showed the same signals in the years before it broke. The math becoming unsustainable, the promises multiplying beyond what the foundation could support, the people inside the system still believing, because belief is always the last thing to go. And then there's the debt. The United States now carries a national debt exceeding $34 trillion. The annual interest payments alone have surpassed $1 trillion, consuming more of the federal budget than national defense. That number grows faster than any realistic projection of revenue to contain it. More obligations than the foundation can hold. More faith required from a world that is quietly, steadily, beginning to ask questions it wasn't asking before. The first system broke when the gap between the promise and the reality became too wide to hide. That gap exists again. The question isn't whether it's there. The question is how wide it gets before someone has to say something. Here is what history shows over and over in systems exactly like this one. The end doesn't arrive as an event. It arrives as a realization. A slow accumulation of moments, each one minor on its own, until one day the weight of them becomes undeniable. And the thing everyone treated as permanent is suddenly being discussed in the past tense. In July of 1944, a group of men made a decision in a mountain hotel in New Hampshire that shaped the next 80 years of human life. The people living inside that decision had no idea it was being made. They woke up the next day in a world that had already been designed around them, and they built their lives inside it, trusted it, depended on it, never questioned it, because it was simply the way things were. That kind of decision is being made again, right now, in rooms you don't have access to, by people you didn't elect, about a system most people still believe is permanent, because it's all they've ever known. The pattern doesn't care about belief. It never has. It just keeps moving. And by the time the moment comes, the speech, the announcement, the night the rules change again, most people will be exactly where they were the last time, watching a screen, wondering how they didn't see it coming,